Hello, everyone. Before we dive into today's episode, I have a couple special announcements. First, this Wednesday, February 5th, we will be welcoming Chris Hayes, the Emmy Award-winning host of All In with Chris Hayes on MSNBC, for a conversation around his new book, The Siren's Call. The event is a sellout, I'm sorry to say, but on the off chance that some tickets are returned and just to get information about future events, visit talkingsandiego.net. Second, I wanted you to know that we have decided to be the sort of house podcast for The Contrarian, the new independent Substack with an amazing array of important writers across the spectrum, from domestic politics, foreign affairs, humor, culture, and the like, and different ages. And as a special feature for that new partnership, you can go to Contrarian Substack and get, as part of your package for subscribing, ads-free Patreon-level subscription to Talking Feds for $1 a month. We would have made it free, but Patreon would only do $1 a month, but still quite a deal, I think. So check that out as well at Talking Feds or the Contrarian Substack. And now, our show. Welcome to Talking Feds, a roundtable that brings together prominent former federal officials and special guests for a dynamic discussion of the most important political and legal topics of the day. I'm Harry Littman. Donald Trump's unprecedented assault on the government he is purportedly leading redoubled in force this week. It was a grotesque spectacle, like a multi-car pileup on the freeway that you can't look away from, except here, the wreckage isn't just metal and glass, but bedrock democratic norms, with millions of Americans caught in the debris. Trump's final set of nominees included 3 candidates so glaringly unfit for their roles that their selection seemed less like governance and more like sabotage. Appointees handpicked to wreck the very agencies they are supposed to oversee. And there was very little cause for confidence that Senate Republicans would exercise independent judgment and reject them, given the vice grip Trump has ruthlessly exercised over the entire Senate Republican caucus. At a press conference after the horrific midair collision that claimed all 67 lives on board, Trump was at his most graceless and nauseating, asserting somehow that blame lay with the DEI policies of the Obama and Biden administrations. And in a second Friday night massacre that occurred after our taping, Trump's Justice Department launched a brazenly illegal purge, moving to fire more than a dozen federal prosecutors from the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington for the sole sin of having worked on the January 6 cases. The department also appeared to put plans in place to do the same to any FBI agent who had been involved in this, the biggest operation in FBI and DOJ history. Given the size and scope of the cases, the directive could ravage the FBI's nationwide workforce. To catalog the prospects for these last few outlandish nominees for cabinet positions to make it through, and to explain what their appointments would mean for the American people, we welcome 3 razor-sharp veterans of law enforcement and political strategy. And they are Asha Rangappa, a senior lecturer at the Yale University's Jackson School of Global Affairs and a former associate dean at Yale Law School. Previously, Asha served as a special agent in the FBI, where she specialized in counterintelligence investigations. She's a contributor on numerous television and radio outlets and now hosts with Renato Mariotti a podcast. What's its name, Asha? Where can people find it?
It's called It's Complicated, and you can find it anywhere you get your podcast and also on YouTube.
Stuart Stevens, a former GOP strategist. He's now a senior advisor to the Lincoln Project and a principal at Resolute Square, a community of strategists fighting to end the right-wing media's assault on our democracy. He's the author of 9, count 'em, 9 books, the latest being The Conspiracy to End America, 5 Ways My Old Party is Driving Democracy to Autocracy. Stuart, thanks for returning to Talking Feds.
Thank you, buddy.
And the Rick Wilson, a political consultant turned political writer. He is a co-founder of the Lincoln Project, a lifelong Republican. He was an early critic of President Trump and has turned his expertise into a steady, and I'm certain, absolutely maddening to Trump onslaught of online ads highlighting the 45th and 47th president's iniquity. Since leaving politics, he's published 2 books, Everything Trump Touches Dies and the recent Running Against the Devil. He's been very good to Talking Feds and has been here repeatedly. Thank you so much for joining in this difficult week.
Delighted to be back with you, Harry.
I wanted to start at the nadir of Point Crazy, which for me and Asha might be Kash Patel, but RFK Jr. certainly has a run at this title. So I wasn't sure what to do, so I think we got to start with a coin flip. So here we go. Asha, can you please call it heads or tails?
Heads.
Tails it is. Stevens and Wilson, do you want to start with Kennedy?
I'm fine either way. My contempt is boundless in either direction.
All right, I take that as a Kennedy pick, whatever that means. RFK Jr., he spent decades peddling dangerous conspiracy theories about vaccines, public health, and modern medicine, false links between school shootings and antidepressants, fought to deregulate raw milk, has said pesticides cause children to become transgender. I'm just going to repeat that sentence. Has said pesticides cause children to become transgender. If you met him at a party, you would just look to slip away one way or another. And that's not to mention his personal skeletons that could fill the Lincoln bedroom. Now, somehow, he's being considered to lead HHS, arguably the most important health position in the country. He is a preposterous nomination. Let's just start before the hearing with, how did we get here?
My theory about this is that Trump knows that these people are idiots and buffoons.
Mm-hmm.
And he nominates them to prove that he can make Republican senators do whatever he wants. It's a humiliation through submission. That you will even vote for a guy who's against the polio vaccine because I tell you to. And I think that's very autocratic. It's the way, Saddam used to make families of the executed pay for the bullet. And the same sort of exercise of power.
This is something I think has largely been missed. RFK isn't just a conspiracy, anti-vax lunatic guy. RFK is also a profiteer off death and misery. RFK is a guy who, when Samoa was having a drop-off in vaccine rates, he went there and said, oh, you're doing the right thing. Your children will be healthier. It's going to be fine. Don't worry. They don't need to be vaccinated. Well, then measles hit and killed 59 kids in American Samoa and sickened 1,500. Measles is something that is entirely preventable with childhood vaccinations that do not cause harm of any sort. The complexities here of his relationships with law firms, these referral deals with law firms, where he has made millions or tens of millions of dollars on those referrals and on the groups that he runs that go out and get money from these referrals. This is, to my mind, one of the most repulsive, one of the most repugnant things that I've ever seen. And no one wants to call him on the fact that the profiteering is, in fact, the point for him. He's not just here because he's a scumbag. He's a scumbag who wants to make money off of children being sick. It is beyond vile.
He answered a question today, a written response on this stuff, but no one's even thinking about it. And I mean, Stuart, that theory is really provocative. Another thing you can say is there is this arch MAGA view that feels oppressed at the treatment of their anti-vaccine views. That's the whole First Amendment challenges, as the government has tried to correct things. So maybe. Let's go to the hearing itself and the signal feature for the hearing. You nailed it, Rick. He lied again and again. You have a tradition of sort of nominee prevarication or bobbing and weaving, but you, as in your words, it's so breathtakingly dishonest that even my high fury filter, which I guess is well worn, is struggling to keep up. What about this notion that you can just shove it down the throats of Republican senators? Lying is sort of irrelevant now. He came in and just fed them a load of crap on statement after statement.
Yeah, I agree with Stuart that this is a loyalty test. Those loyalty tests have been kind of increasing in their absurdity ever since the first Trump administration. And so people are just selling their souls, at this point, like even just their entire limbs, to show their loyalty. I also think that Trump, my sense also is that he has a very primitive understanding of these agencies and such an inflated sense of his own abilities that I also think there's a comprehension problem of the impact of these people on the actual functioning of government. I mean, all of these people have a huge contempt for government, right? This is what's the common thread is they're all contemptuous. And I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Despicable Me. It's a movie, and it's like, it's about these like villains, like these super villains, and they all have these like caricature like origin stories. That is what all of these nominees seem like to me. They're like super villains, but kind of like parodies of them. And Kennedy in particular, this idea of finding some kind of glee or satisfaction or something from the other people's misery. It's reminds me of like people with Munchausen syndrome, who make their own kids sick because they get something out of it, or the Dr. Death in Dallas who was like botching surgeries because it was just sort of like a clinical, like kind of let's just see what happens. There's a lack of empathy or actual, I don't know, like conscience. And I think this is what Caroline Kennedy was actually trying to convey in her letter.
I mean, that also went under the radar a little, but putting animals in blenders to feed to his snakes and showing his cousins that. Also, like, crazy use of drugs and the like. One of the things also that came out on Friday is he has settled a claim, that's all he said, for misconduct of a point. To follow up with you two guys about Asha's initial point, Trump's not really understanding this stuff. It seems especially true here. This is both, bleach for COVID, but he seemed to say when he nominated him, he's going to be hands off and let Kennedy have fun with this, with the, HHS, a kind of a breathtaking dereliction. Even good old fashioned libertarian conservatives say there's a few things government should do, and national defense, public health would be among them. But as Asha said, these guys are over on a sort of another side of the spectrum.
I think, Harry, that, remember, Caroline Kennedy called Bobby Kennedy a predator and that he was an addict to heroin before.
Let's just add the junior in there.
Oh, yeah, junior. Yes, sorry. But I think that Trump has a feral cunning about his base. And a lot of what shaped this election was the anti-vax propaganda that became a centerpiece of MAGA. Before COVID, the anti-vax world was centered around a lot of Brentwood and Beverly Hills housewives. It was small. They had this sort of woo approach, and they didn't want their kids to die. They didn't think that ivermectin was going to cure them, or crystals or whatever. But Trump understood how powerful that was, and he also saw that one of his chief rivals, Ron DeSantis, made enormous hay in Florida out of ending the COVID lockdowns, of banning masks, of all the things that Trump picks up on. This subtle signal, or not so subtle signal, left him feeling that he had a lot of running room to play in when it came to letting Kennedy win that group of weird Republicans over. And he did. He was very effective about that. And it had some crossover appeal for some of these people who are nuts, basically.
I think this lack of empathy is really at the core of it. It's not going to hurt anybody that Trump knows. There is this group of sort of Whole Foods anti-vaxxer types that Rick is talking about. But the people who are really hurt by this stuff are lower economic spectrum. There's not going to be a measles outbreak at Exeter, very likely. It's going to be at some rural high school. A lot of these people are dependent upon public health. The idea that you're getting vaccinated is the only rare contact they have with public health systems. They don't have doctors. And I think that they don't care about that. Plus, the degree to which the state fails, the need for an authoritarian rises. And there's a direct correlation in that, which is, it goes to all the attacks on the FBI, all the attacks on the judicial system, all the attacks on the voting system, sort of systematically going to every pillar of a civil society and saying that these things are no longer functional. The FAA, you can't fly. And that means you need a strong man to save you. And it's kind of textbook. I mean, it's straight out of Anne Applebaum's and Jen Mercia, Ruth Ben Ghiat's writings.
We had that one moment, these all just seem to just slide through, and then the Republicans step up and say nice stuff. It happened with Patel. There was the one moment where Senator Hassan from New Hampshire, really confronted him, kind of told the story that Rick told when you first read about it. She has a autistic child. She was, desperate to figure out, is there a vaccine connection? There isn't. But she brought home the kind of personal insult, and it seemed like it was the sort of rare emotional moment in hearings that could sort of elevate things or could bring on some abashedness or concern from the Republicans. Do you see it going anywhere?
I got some bad news for you, folks. We live in a post-shame society when it comes to Republicans. They do not care about that heart-wrenching story, and they don't care that RFK did that and said that specifically because he was trying to make money off of it. They don't care about that. And I have been very blunt about my feelings about RFK, to the point where the idea that this man, who I consider a mass murderer, frankly, if he gets that job, he will ban vaccines. He will stop cancer research. They will stop research on mRNA vaccines, which are one of the fastest routes right now to individualized cancer treatment. He has already fought against Gardasil, the HPV vaccine, which has saved women's lives from cervical cancer. It was the number 3 cause of women's deaths. It's plunged dramatically since Gardasil came onto the market. He hates it. He doesn't like it. He doesn't trust it. He wants it gone. You would not say to yourself, what we need in the cabinet office is a serial killer. That's what we need. But in Trump's world, he expects these people in the Senate to say, Donald wants him, so Jeffrey Dahmer gets the job of Secretary of the Interior. Donald wants him, so we're putting Ted Kaczynski in charge of the post office. These things will have actual material consequences, just as a lot of Trump's very bad policy decisions in this early going, they're hurting his base more than they're hurting elites. They're hurting his own people. These people that are in Trump world that are saying, oh my God, I didn't know I was going to lose my disability. Well, yeah, when they shut off federal funds, they shut off federal funds. There's an idea, I think, out there among the Senate. They're going to get through this. They're going to handle this. They're going to take 1 or 2 of them down and then let him have the rest. The consequences of this in the domestic side could not be higher with RFK. They could not be more terrifying and more pendant. I think Kash Patel on the legal side is a separate kind of nightmare. To my mind, Kennedy is the person who could put more Americans in their grave than any other Trump cabinet member.
Can I ask a question to Rick and Stuart, which is, aren't the pharmaceutical companies against this? In other words, isn't there, even if we just go to the purely bottom line thing, I would think that there are corporate interests that are going to be harmed that even Republicans would need to be beholden to. If you can't develop vaccines, if you can't sell the drugs that you already have made, that's a problem for this whole industry.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. Nobody's talking about that. I think that they just have committed themselves to Trump and Trumpism. And the Trump campaign has been from the beginning a large criminal enterprise. So the regular forms of funding doesn't mean anything to him. But it'd be very interesting to know, I bet someone's going to write a good book about this, what sort of frantic lobbying behind the scenes is going on with pharmaceutical companies.
I mean, I guess to your point, Stuart, corporate interests don't do well in autocracies.
Yes, no, it's true. It's always kills me about these. You have these people, the Elon Musk, the Peter Thiels, they've succeeded in America in a way that was unimaginable in any other system.
Right.
And yet they are devoted to changing the system. Like, would you rather be a CEO in Russia, dude?
Right.
I mean, you have it pretty good here. Jamie Dimon. Jamie Dimon is a Trump guy. Steve Schwartzman. They're Trumpists. I think it's extraordinarily short-sighted.
There seems like a separate agenda on his part of showing whatever constituency it is he can, force them down, and maybe that explains it. One quick point about Kennedy, and then we can move on to the loser of the coin flip. You hear about guys, they have strange views, and then you get to see them for the first time. This comes up with judicial candidates. And to the extent we'd only seen him in snippets, I have to say, on a personal level, he came across as just about as strange as his views. He was flummoxed a lot. He didn't talk very clearly. He didn't seem very self-possessed. There was nothing kind of reassuring about his actual manner up there. Okay. Kash Patel, the one we've all, at least in law enforcement, have been thinking about, the man who Bill Barr said over my dead body when it was a question of his being, Bill Barr said over my dead body when it's a question of his being a deputy, the man who has a hit list published, for God's sake. Let's go to his hearing. Asha, you are a former agent. You have a sense of what it might mean for people in the Bureau. You maybe even have a sense of what it does mean for people as they think about it. Can you give us your basic thoughts, including what, if anything, you may know about what's actually the response within the building?
Sure. With regard to the hearing, I was traveling yesterday, so I was only getting certain snippets. And of course, the TV coverage was almost entirely on the plane crash. So it's unfortunate that all these hearings aren't getting more airtime. I'll just say one thing, which is, and I put this on Blue Sky, there is one transgression that is completely unforgivable in the FBI, no matter who you are, and it's lack of candor. Lack of candor is the inability to answer something truthfully and straightforwardly. And if you exhibit lack of candor, you are fired, no questions asked, even if the underlying transgression was something very minor, like did you fill out your timesheet wrong or something like that. The number of times that I saw Patel get called out on things that he claimed not to know. The idea that he didn't know this podcast host that he was on, 8 times, where he said things. He said, I don't know the name of that person off the top of my head. That he didn't know who was in the J6 choir. Like, these strain credulity. And I think there's other reporting that demonstrates that this is just verifiably untrue. And right there is just a huge problem in terms of transforming the culture of the Bureau. I mean, if that's who you are bringing in, then you are going to begin tolerating an entire organization that is supposed to be built on integrity and trust. And by the way, what that means is that as people lose trust in the Bureau and agents, because they can't, I think even among law enforcement, I think FBI is generally still trusted overall. And this as a prosecutor, it's going to hurt cases being prosecuted. People aren't going to believe the agents on the stand. People aren't going to talk to them when they knock on your door. I mean, this is beyond all of the even bigger things of going after enemies, it's just, to me, such a dangerous thing. And yes, this is having an impact more so than Patel, these firings that are going on at the senior levels, especially I think even SES employees, senior executive service. I'm a member of the Society of Former Special Agents of the FBI, the Connecticut chapter, and there is a flurry of emails going on. These are retired agents. These are people in their 70s and 80s, okay? These are people who worked under Hoover and probably voted for Trump.
Huge inbred respect for authority. That's just part of who they are, right?
They love Hoover. And I think that most of them, I mean, they could just never bring themselves to vote Democrat, and I'm sure they held their nose even this last time if they didn't love him and voted for Trump. They are like, what the hell is going on? Because this, I think for them, this is not supposed to be happening. And by the way, the senior levels of the FBI right now are people that were put in place by Christopher Wray after he did the purge of the last people. And I think also people who were, as far as I can tell, at least some of them somewhat sympathetic to Trump, because we know that there were senior DOJ and FBI officials who, for example, were not on board with the Mar-a-Lago search, were trying to slow roll some of these investigations into Trump. So I think there is a lot of confusion on exactly what's going on, and it's not being taken well.
One of the things that people at the department are so concerned about, you stand up and say, Rick Wilson for the United States, that means something. And now what it means after years of propaganda is, oh, you're a deep state type. And an FBI agent who knocks on the door, I mean, in every, what do FBI agents do so often? They persuade people to do the right thing and cooperate. Good luck with that. And all, I mean, at the real ground level, man, this hurts.
Look, I have done confirmations. I have worked on people's confirmations before. And what Asha said is absolutely correct. Not only is that an FBI value, it used to be a value with the Senate, where if you lied to them, it was better to lay it all out in the private pregame meetings and settle it, because a lot of times they would say, okay, you're qualified in every other way. What about this one issue, this thing, or that problem? You talk them through it. And then plenty of people got confirmed even with problems. What Patel did yesterday, I think, had two fatal flaws. It may not kill his nomination, but it certainly kills him as a leader. The first is, as we've all noted, he just lied yesterday. Lied repeatedly, pretended he didn't know people, pretended he hadn't said things. But I think what may bang him in the Senate, what may hurt him more, is his arrogance. He was rude, snippy, short, sarcastic, and dismissive of questions. I sort of read some body language there, and I think you may end up with J.D. Vance having to get out of bed again to break into their tie on this guy. And some of the problems that he refused to address yesterday about the J6 stuff, about his relationships with people, it would have all been survivable if he had just said, I was selling a book, I was talking to whoever, I'm an asshole, I'm inflammatory, I was trolling. But instead, now he's trying to say, I'm going to be the savior of the Bureau's integrity, which I think is absurd on its face. But, especially for folks like Asha and for you, Harry, who understand DOJ and understand the role the FBI should play in our society as a very special organization with a unique part to play in federal law enforcement, you could see that this guy just wanted to be out of there so he could get to the building and start purging Trump's enemies and start attacking Trump's enemies. Watch what happens. When he gets that job, he will go over to the FBI. There will be a massive purge. I'm going to guess a third or more of the people in that building will be out. And some of them will be because their picture appeared on a Facebook post with somebody who Trump hates. It's going to be that petty and horrible. We will not focus under Kash Patel on going after terrorists, foreign espionage, threats to this country, organized crime, drug smuggling, anything else. We will be focused on purging and punishing the enemies of Donald Trump.
And by the way, the talent drain that implies is really devastating. But Stuart, I wonder what you think about Rick's view that he was maybe erred on the side of arrogance. What it reminded me of was a strategy that was most recently employed, or that most memorably, by Brett Kavanaugh. You come out and he was very chest thumping and how dare you, and the sort of male Trump nominee, and really shoving it down their throats. And I don't know if who is gonna stand up and say to the White House, he was okay, but he was a little arrogant. That good luck sort of pushing back with them.
Oh, I don't think that's what they tell the White House. I think that would shape some of the decisions behind the curtain.
That's true. Actually, you have 8 ways to get him already. But
right.
I wonder, as a political consultant in your old role, do you think it was a mistake, whether he gets by or not, to be so chest thumping, especially in confronting, lies? being how dare you, as opposed to nuanced.
Look, my dad was an FBI agent and under Hoover, and I'm just glad that he's not around to see this. One thing we know about senators is they like to be respected. I think Rick makes a really good point. Nobody ever didn't get confirmed because they were polite and really deferential to senators. What's just astounding to me is why didn't a group of these senators go to Trump and just say no? Appoint regular conservatives. Appoint normal people. I wrote about something, my old client and friend, we were pages together in Washington, Roger Wicker, who, there's a guy who he literally would not let Pete Hegseth cut his lawn. This weird guy shows up drinking with tattoos, who's weird to women. You don't want that guy around the house. And he still humiliates himself. And, in other chairmen of Joint Chiefs of Staff, we've had powerful figures there. And, can you imagine John McCain doing this? You just go to Trump and say, no, we're not going to do this. Pick somebody else.
Do we know that they didn't try that?
I haven't seen any reporting to that effect.
If they tried it and failed, that they would have tried to get credit for it. It's a complete collapse of the party in any sort of moral authority. And it goes to the way these people see themselves. They don't see themselves as large figures. They see themselves as small people who in this moment are being dwarfed by a much larger. And it sort of goes back to obeying in advance, because that's really what they're doing when they do that. Strom Thurmond wouldn't have done that. Strom Thurmond would have told him to go screw himself and, pick somebody else.
And by the way, when it came their time, it was a loving to Patel, right, from the Republican side.
Mm-hmm.
Not even a pretense of, well, we have some concerns. It was, you're going to be great.
Right. And I dismiss that from people like Tommy Tuberville, who is an idiot. But from the rank and file normies, it was, you're going to bring back honor to the FBI. We'll see how that works.
Again, to go back to the self-interest in this, as Rick mentioned, the resources of the FBI are finite. So already, given the number of threats we have between criminal violations, between cyber threats, between counterintelligence, between counterterrorism, we don't have enough agents to cover them all, right? We have, 14,000 agents just on the counterintelligence side, which I know there are more Russian spies here now than there were during the Cold War. And there's an FBI counterintelligence investigation opened against China once every 12 hours, probably even more frequently at this point. So, we can't keep up with these threats. So when you purge half the FBI and then you're investigating the other half and trying to, go on a witch hunt, guess what we're not doing? And what I don't understand is, and to tie this to the earlier discussion about the hearing, these senators also go to crowded places that can be soft targets. They have family members who get cancer. They also fly in and out of DCA. In other words, isn't there at some point a sense of, I could die if I don't do my freaking job here? Even if you don't care about anybody else, is there no sense of self-preservation or kind of concern for even one's own well-being and immediate family to care about the quality of these nominees?
I think in a weird way, more than anything that's hurt Trump in the last 10 days has been this OMB debacle. Because I talked to somebody today who is the senior most staffer of a U.S. senator that I know, a Republican, who said to me, this person's boss is bouncing off the walls because we're losing hundreds of millions of dollars of grant money to our universities, to companies in our state that are contractors, and we don't know what to do, and he can't figure out who to talk to. And Susie Wiles told him that she doesn't know what's going on over at OMB, and she'd look into it. This organization is out of control. And what we've gotten to now is the same clusterfuck that Trump was in his first administration. And I think that idea that people understand that they're in danger, it is a slow growing idea, but it's going to be real. I think Asha's got a good point. They're going to realize, hey, air traffic control is not something you want to farm out to some 20-year-old kid from the Heritage Foundation who's going to find a contractor to do it instead of having it done by the FAA. National Institute of Health, you're not going to get cutting-edge cancer research funded by Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg. These things are different, and they're, even some of these more conservative senators, and this guy is a conservative, are freaked out by the damage this OMB problem has caused. There was an idea for a minute that Trump was different this time, and they're starting to wonder if they were incorrect on that.
Or correct in the other direction. It's now time to take a moment for our sidebar feature, which explains some of the issues and topics that are prominent in the news. Today's feature is about the parental advisory label, the warning label placed on audio recordings that contain explicit content. And to explain this topic, we welcome Will Kimbrough. Will Kimbrough is a Grammy-nominated singer-songwriter, producer, and musician, a solo artist, as well as a member of Emmylou Harris's Red Dirt Boys and Jimmy Buffett's Coral Reefer Band. His songs have been recorded by artists including Buffett, Little Feat, and Shamika Copeland. With that, I give you Will Kimbrough on the parental advisory label.
If you've ever bought a CD or a record with mature lyrics, you've seen the parental advisory label. The black and white logo was designed to be a warning sign, a scarlet letter, to brand certain pieces of music as contraband. Instead, the parental advisory label has become a badge of allure for consumers and a point of pride for artists. How did this come to be? In 1985, the Parents Music Resource Center, or PMRC for short, put out a list called the Filthy 15, featuring popular songs that they felt had morally questionable lyrics. The list included hits by artists like Prince, Madonna, and Judas Priest. The PMRC was made up of prominent political wives, including Tipper Gore, wife of then-Senator Al Gore. Instead of pushing for stricter laws, the PMRC called for a voluntary rating system from the Recording Industry Association of America, or the RIAA, comparable to the movie rating system used in the United States. This list prompted an unforgettable Senate hearing in September 1985, where musicians like Frank Zappa, John Denver, and Twisted Sister lead singer Dee Snider attended to argue their case. Each musician spoke out against the labels, arguing they wouldn't actually protect children and would instead support censorship. Eventually, the RIAA agreed to a compromise, a small label on records with explicit lyrics that included profanity, violence, or sexual content. In 1990, the now familiar Parental Advisory Explicit Lyrics label was adopted by the RIAA and has remained ever since. Has it worked? The effectiveness of the label has been debated from the beginning. Many claim it doesn't actually stop children from accessing explicit lyrics, and may have actually made these songs more appealing, turning the label into a symbol of rebellion or edginess for artists. For Talking Feds, I'm Will Kimbrough.
Thank you very much, Will. Will's latest album, For the Life of Me, is available now on all platforms. All right, it is now time for a spirited debate brought to you by our sponsor, Total Wine and More. Each episode, you'll be hearing an expert talk about the pros and cons of a particular issue in the world of wine, spirit, and beverages.
Thank you, Harry. In today's spirited debate, Bordeaux and Napa face off, pitting the Bordeaux Reds against the California Cabs. From a numbers standpoint, the Bordeaux region is the clear winner, with more wineries and higher production of bottles, producing nearly 6.5 times more wine than Napa. But more doesn't necessarily mean better. Bordeaux wines are a blend of 5 different grapes. The Bordeaux region is actually divided by an estuary and 2 rivers forming the left bank and the right bank. Left bank wines are predominantly Cabernet Sauvignon based, featuring more tannins and bigger overall structure. Right bank wines are predominantly Merlot based, richer in fruit, with a softer mouthfeel and less tannin and acidity. Now, much like the left bank, Napa wines are predominantly Cabernet Sauvignon. and well known for their rich, bold style. Many of these wines are also blends, but you can also find 100% varietal wines from Napa. So whether you're Team Bordeaux or Team Napa, your local Total Wine & More has a huge selection, so you can enjoy the best of both worlds at a price that won't break the left or right bank. So find what you love and love what you find, only at Total Wine & More. Cheers!
Thanks to our friends at Total Wine & More for today's A Spirited Debate. All right, let's just take a minute because I want to get to these things he said, for the third supposedly troubled nominee. But here's one that can't really do any real damage. The Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, who does seem to be perhaps in peril, unable to disavow her support for none other than Edward Snowden. We really do have just such a great collection of not just anti-institutionalists, but anti-patriots. But anyway, she, of the three, seems to be, or she, the Vegas odds on her, we are now told, are a little bit longer. What do you see as, her prospects? And maybe let's cut to the chase on all of these. I'm hearing no one confident about anyone's not making it through. Any thoughts about Gabbard? And then also, who is the most likely of the three actually not to be confirmed?
Just one thing, I don't know why we don't do this, but there's no question that the Russians wanted Trump to get elected in 2016 and helped him. We can argue whether or not it was determinative, but you really never know these things in politics. Causality is the hardest thing to establish in politics. So what did the Russians get? I mean, unimaginable what they got. And all of this makes sense if you look through it from a spectrum of what would Putin want. So Putin would want exactly what Asha's saying, a weak FBI that can't investigate Russian spies. They would want a nut in charge of, this buffoon in charge of the Defense Department. They would want someone like Tulsi Gabbard, who, for the life of me, I can't understand, if she's not being paid as a Russian agent, she has some sort of action against the Russian government because she is certainly acting like it.
Or they against her, right.
And I think sometimes we kind of overcomplicate it. This is what Putin wanted. This is what Putin got. And it's you just think about it, the single most consistent anti-Soviet Union, anti-communist, anti-Russia element of American politics is the most conservative element of the Republican Party. And that is now the beating heart of the pro-Putin party in American politics. And that's just extraordinary. It's like Churchill became the pro-Nazi guy.
I think Gabbard is in real trouble. I think RFK is in some trouble. I think Patel's going to get another vote where Vance has to come in, but he's going to make it.
Going back 2 weeks ago, to predict, starting with Hepseth, the series of victories would have added to what was already a considerable bout of nausea. Let's move to the general White House update. Plane crash. Right? Everyone begins with common decency, sympathy, etc. Who it's in black and white. I just don't know what else to say. He blamed, basically, he got worked up a little bit, and then he was getting more and more kind of out there, crazy, what happened to his meds. But sure enough, he blamed diversity requirements at the FAA and Biden and Obama for the midair collision over the Potomac River. Is it just stray lunacy, or, is DEI the sort of new immigration? When he was in the campaign, that was his sort of emotional home base when he was getting beat up in the debate, say. So is it now DEI? Everything's going to be DEI, and it's just where he moved to instinctually?
I do think that DEI is going to be his default. But I also think that we need to call it for what it is, which is DEI is code. It's basically a euphemism for the N-word. I mean, this is just blatant racism, right? This is a coded way of saying it's probably some black person who did it. And then there's a bunch of other people that are thrown in too. Brown people, women, white women, disabled people, whatever. I mean, lump LGBT, trans, everything. But that's what this is. And I think that when we don't challenge the premise, when we accept that framing and keep calling it DEI initiatives, he's not talking about DEI initiatives. He is trying to deflect by tapping into people's raw and visceral racism. And I think that it would be great to, at some point, maybe have Mary Trump on because she knows so much about his psychology, that I think the taking of responsibility for anything, I believe for Trump feels like self-annihilation. It's the ultimate form of weakness for him. And so I think the more that he's put into a corner, the more he begins to flail, and then the more he has to find what he believes is going to be the scapegoat that can just, everybody can get on, or at least the people he cares about will get on board with. And I think that's what's going on.
There's a desire to write the story that Trump is popular or something because he's more popular than he was. But all new presidents have a bump in popularity. Trump, a week ago, and I can't imagine it's gotten any better, was the second most unpopular newly elected president at this point in their term. The only president that surpassed it was Donald Trump in 2017.
And it's gotten worse. I don't know if you guys followed the latest poll.
Yeah, and it's going to get worse. And it's a different conversation, but I think there's a very solid case to be made that this is a high water mark of Trumpism. This is their Pickett's charge. And there's a reason that they didn't want to talk about Project 25 in the campaign, because they knew that people didn't like it. People don't like it more because it's being implemented and it affects their lives. So they can't get their payments. They can't have all of this chaos. So I think it's a flawed theory. And one of the keys to Trump being able to win this past election was staying out of sight. And he can't do that now. He won't allow himself.
The damage he's doing to his own base right now, and the degree to which his own, not only his political base, but his voting base is freaking out. Because look, let's be very real here. As much as the Republican Party of MAGA likes to talk about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and getting rid of that government socialism, a meaningful fraction of their voters are on Medicare, Medicaid, disability, Social Security, TANF, SNAP. These are programs that all of them were shut off the other day by what I am told is a 28-year-old employee who went from Hillsdale College to the Heritage Foundation to the Office of Management of the Budget, doesn't know what they're doing, doesn't know the impact of it, can't think it through because they have no experience, and people are losing their minds. Now, and his electeds in the House and the Senate are also, they're the ones getting the phone calls, blaming them. I never underscore Trump's sort of perniciousness. He's a political STD. He always comes back around, but he is getting off to a very rocky start.
Yeah, I do think that's clear. And I thought about it with the pardons, which, the one way of looking at it is he intuits, or maybe the 2025 people do, that this is the shot. Just screw it, take everything you can now. And with this, yeah. All right, I want to make one point, though, or at least ask you about it, because he's doing some unpopular things. He will blunder, when those members go back to their districts. Are you for the pardons of the violent offenders? And people are going to die, everything you said. But other than Chris Murphy, no one is talking, however, which is a little dismaying, about the erosion of the constitutional structure, the aggrandizement of executive power. Is it your sense that that's just too kind of abstract?
What a loser cuck issue. That's such old thinking.
Exactly. All right. Everyone, yep, you agree? Look, I feel this way because this is the mine I'm working in a lonely way every day. Maybe people see it overall, but it does seem to be the case that what's really underlies all this stuff. Two things underlie it. I think incredible aggrandizement of the executive, and then also trying somehow every way to just erase from the pages of history what happened. It still seems to be his obsession. But the focus, to the extent he's blundering and people are possibly nervous, it seems to be in particular issues, I guess. So that, patriots have to hope for the erosions to occur as a result of terrible policy decisions, even though the biggest thing staring us in the face, to my mind, is the distortion of the constitutional scheme.
Well, these guys at OMB are about to learn a lot about Article 2. They're about to have a lot of Article 2 smacked up against their heads, because The idea that the Constitution is waived by Donald Trump's executive orders, I think it is unbelievably pernicious and dangerous.
And we'll see what the Supreme Court has to say about it. Okay, we are just about out of time, except for our final feature of Talking 5, where we take a question and each of us has to answer in 5 words or fewer. Today's question comes out of the press conference. What is the next thing that Trump will blame on Democrats' DEI policies? 5 words or fewer, please, guests.
Bird flu.
Very good.
The Super Bowl halftime show.
Some massive tragedy.
I'll try to keep it light. I'm going with poor water pressure in toilets. Thank you so much, Asha, Stuart, and Rick. And thank you very much, listeners, for tuning in to Talking Feds. If you like what you've heard, please tell a friend to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or wherever they get their podcasts. And please take a moment to rate and review this podcast. You can also subscribe to us on YouTube, where we are posting full episodes, talking books, and bonus video content. And check us out on Substack at Talking Fed Substack, where I am posting 2 or 3 bulletins a week to break down the various threats out there to constitutional norms and the rule of law. You can follow us on Twitter at Talking Feds Pod, and you can look to see our latest offerings on Patreon. Talking Feds remains a completely independent production, so if you like the work we do and are inclined to support the show, joining our Patreon is the best way to do it. Oh, and if you haven't already heard, Talking Feds has joined forces with The Contrarian, a bold new media venture with a large array of prominent voices, all dedicated first and foremost to preserving democracy in these troubled times. All Contrarian subscribers will get access to our Patreon for just $1 a month. Rest assured, we're still the same scrappy, independent podcast you've come to know and trust, just now linked with an ambitious and vital project designed for this pivotal moment in our nation's legal and political discourse. Find out more at contrarian.substack.com. Thanks for tuning in, and don't worry, as long as you need answers, the Feds will keep talking. Talking Feds is produced by Catherine Devine. Our associate producer is Becca Havian. Sound engineering by Matt McCardle. Rosie Don Griffin, David Lieberman, Hamza Mahadrenathan, Emma Maynard, and Hallie Necker are our contributing writers. Production assistance by Akshaj Turbailu, Genesis Magpayo, and Sebastian Navarro. Thank you to Will Kimbrough for teaching us about the parental advisory label. Our music, as always, is by the amazing Philip Glass. Talking Feds is a production of Delito LLC. I'm Harry Littman. Talk to you later.